Good morning, everybody, or good whatever time it is where you are. Today I want to talk about the practice of comic book art swiping, which is not about stealing comic books or comic art, but rather the practice of an artist tracing or copying another artist's work. It's an age-old but less than respected comic book tradition that goes back as far as comic books. Now, artists will copy each other all the time. It's how we learn. And just because you're influenced by an artist doesn't mean that your work is not original, as the entire history of art can demonstrate. So let's distinguish swiping from some other practices that are less ethically shady. So first off, I'd say there's influence or emulation. Particularly in the comic world, you might break into the industry by emulating a popular artist. Just one example, Bill Sienkiewicz, his early work emulated Neil Adams, but of course once he established himself, he became a tremendously original and influential voice in comics. And there was a time at Marvel when you couldn't get a job unless you drew like Jack Kirby. That's all they wanted. And comic styles, they go through certain trends that get picked up by, it seems, a majority of artists of the day. And you can accuse an artist of being derivative or unoriginal, but of course it's perfectly legitimate to imitate another style, and it's even necessary if you're working on licensed material. Then I would say there's something called cloning, when an artist reproduces their own work. Again, this can be seen as a cheat, but ethically there's not really anything wrong with it. One example here is John Byrne. I'm thinking there was a time when John Byrne was writing and drawing 2 monthly titles at the same time. That is just an insane amount of output, and I feel like if he wanted to reproduce one of his own drawings and change the costumes, then he had certainly earned that right, even though maybe some of us buying those comics felt a little cheated. I don't know. Also different from swiping is what you might call an homage. And this is when an illustration is intended to be recognized as a new version of another famous or familiar work. An homage might often come with a notation acknowledging the original artist. Maybe not always. And then there is the comic trope that you might see reproduced over and over, where certain scenarios and situations are really common, especially to comics and maybe especially to the superhero genre. It only makes sense certain images would reappear maybe independently. So emulation, homage, cloning, and tropes are all different from swiping. Back in the old days, artists would use a light box to project images onto paper so they could trace them. But now, thanks to computers, it's even much easier to trace over the images that you might grab from somebody else's work. I still believe in most cases swiping is done to save time due to the factory nature of the profession. Professional comic artists are expected to produce an incredible amount of work on tight deadlines. But those are reasons and shouldn't be excuses. Swiping does betray a lack of creativity and originality, not to mention integrity. It's morally wrong to reproduce somebody else's work without citing your sources. But also, thanks to computers and the internet, it's much easier now for people to find and to call out instances of swiping and publicly shame the perpetrators. And this has all been on my mind recently because I copy from the work of others all the time. When I do that, I'm typically drawing for my own pleasure and edification and not for a client or with the intention of profit. But I've recently started making more of my work public and sharing my process. And so I want to be very open and conscientious about what my sources are and not claim work as completely original when it's been heavily influenced or copied. One of my own remedies for when I'm tempted to swipe another's work is to actually create my own reference to work from. But that's a subject for another video. So thank you for listening. Please subscribe to the channel and share with all your friends.